I think the Georgia Bulldogs have the heart of a champion. That's what Nick Saban had to say prior to Georgia's big 31-17 win over Tennessee. And if those were his thoughts on this Georgia team before that game, I don't know what he said afterwards, but I can only imagine that he thinks this Georgia team could really go all the way. And I'm starting to think he could be right. Now, I've always said throughout the season, this team can win a national championship. Even after they lost to Ole Miss. That was really ugly, but as we've seen, and as Kirby Smart has said 100,000 times this year, and as Nick Saban knows, it is so tough to play on the road in the SEC, and I think that was a big reason why Nick Saban and everyone on that College Game Day crew and everyone on this channel, and pretty much most of you watching this, that's why we thought Georgia would beat Tennessee, right? There weren't many people picking Tennessee to win the game. I thought it'd be a little closer, but this Georgia team did show a lot of heart. Down 10-0. Carson Beck and that offense needing a big score. He comes up with that big scramble. I think it was a 2nd and 10. They're driving. He gets kind of corralled by some Tennessee defenders, breaks a couple tackles, takes off for a first down. And I remember thinking 2 plays later when he hit Oscar Delp for that touchdown, I think it was 2 plays later, that scramble was gigantic. They really needed points there, and they really needed a touchdown. They need a big answer, and that was a big scramble. And ever since then, from that second quarter on, and I think that happened in the very beginning of the second quarter, but after that scramble and after that score, Georgia went on a massive drive, right? I think when it was 10-7, Georgia went on a 20 something run. They won the game 31-17. I'm not trying to do math. What I'm trying to say is that this Georgia team still has a chance to do something special. And Nick Saban already said it, right? And this team, it's good to see them playing maybe their best game of the season at this point in the season, right? Because they're still not healthy. They're still banged up. We saw them play outstanding football in the second half against Clemson, and that's the team we saw show up in Athens. And you could tell that this team was ready to get back and play in front of their home crowd like that after so many days playing basically, all over the place, right, over the past month. But listen, if I'm a team that doesn't win a conference title and I get into the playoff, if Georgia beats Tech comfortably, doesn't play in the SEC title game, I'd hate to have to host a Georgia team coming off this big win against Tennessee, even though it's at that point it'd be, weeks later, right? And I'm going to talk about the playoff scenario in a second because Georgia does have one of the best resumes out there. They've got 2 tough losses in different ways, right? They almost beat Alabama, probably could have won that game. They definitely could have won that game. You could argue they should have won the game. But against Ole Miss, they just got beat up. All right, they lost the battle in the trenches. They lost the physical nature of that ball game. But they came back against number 7 Tennessee and beat it by double digits. 31-7 run, right, over the final 3 quarters. They showed a lot of heart. And they've shown a lot of heart all year. And that's what I've been trying to get to. That's kind of my point here. We saw the heart against Kentucky, right? Ugly game. They won by 1. And at that time, everyone's saying, they did this last year against Missouri in 2022. They did it last year against Auburn in 23. They squeaked by. They didn't play their best on the road. They snuck by, and it was ugly. But they'll bounce back, right? We saw them lose to Alabama 2 weeks later. It was not great at times against Auburn. I still think they probably won that game a little more than the score indicated. Same with Mississippi State. I believe they only won by 10. It wasn't great at times. The secondary didn't look great. And again, giving up 31 points is not something we're used to seeing. But they fought back and they rallied offensively and got points down the stretch in that ball game to win comfortably. And of course, State had a late touchdown that made that score look a little closer. But they fought through some adversity there. And they fought through adversity throughout this season. And against the Gators, they showed a lot of heart. That game meant a lot. Against Texas, obviously, they showed a lot of heart. A lot of people, including myself, thought they'd go to Austin and lose. Hand up, I was wrong. But we saw glimpses then, right? The offense wasn't great. They were able to run the ball effectively here and there, enough to get the job done. That defense showed up, and they showed that, hey, we're still one of the best defenses in college football, and they showed that again against Tennessee. This team can win a national championship. They've got to get healthier, and they've got to get more consistent. I know those are two big factors, right? And it's hard to get more consistent at this point in the season because you kind of are what you are. But we've seen teams get better, South Carolina. We've seen teams get worse, LSU, so on and so on. And that's why when I'm talking about, someone asked me about the playoffs, it's hard for me to look at the losses. I think we're 10 weeks into the season, right? It's what have we learned through the 10 weeks? Who looks better at the 10-week mark? Who are the best teams? Not the most who's deserving. If it was who's the most deserving, Florida State would have been in last year. They weren't in because they weren't one of the best teams. The committee got it right in that aspect. Georgia was one of the 4 best teams. They didn't get in. It is what it was. They didn't nail it completely, but it could have been worse. This year, like South Carolina's lost to LSU, in my opinion, just didn't happen. Number one, South Carolina's a better team right now. I think they would beat LSU. They're playing better. They've gotten better as a team over time, where LSU's done the exact opposite. They're playing horrible football. They're playing worse and worse and worse. And if they played again, I think South Carolina would win that game. And I think the refs kind of cost South Carolina too. So South Carolina's got 3 losses. Don't tell me there's 12 teams in the country playing better than the Gamecocks, right? But because they have 3 losses, everyone's just not even thinking about them. Even though that loss to LSU should be kind of just thrown away and not remembered. That's just how it is. You have to have context with losses. And with Georgia, they lost to 2 of the best teams in the country. Ole Miss and Alabama should be in the top 12. They're playoff teams. Georgia played them both on the road. Tough loss to Alabama. That would have been one of the biggest comeback wins in college football history. But they didn't. They came up short, and it is what it was. But they shouldn't. I remember saying at the time, people shouldn't look at Georgia differently because of that tough loss to Alabama. Just the same way people shouldn't look at Tennessee differently because of that loss in Athens to Georgia. I think Tennessee is one of the 12 best teams in the country. If you're Penn State or Indiana, you're the 6th best team, in my opinion, in the SEC. And that's going to sound like SEC bias, but don't tell me on a neutral field Indiana and Penn State are beating Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. It's not happening. So at the end of the day, the SEC's beating up on each other, and that's why they have losses. But if you're asking me who are the 12 best teams in college football, I'd say those 5, and I'd throw South Carolina in there too. But we'll see what the committee does. But anyway, Nick Saban and a lot of people, but Nick Saban really, when he comes out and says, this team's got the heart of a champion, that says something. This guy's won 6 of them. He knows what a championship team looks like. He knows that you have to fight through adversity and win tight games and win, close games on the road to inferior opponents. That's part of the season. That's how teams grow. They learn from it. They fight through that stuff. They survive. If you want to win a national championship, you have to figure out how to survive games. Not only win them, but you have to know how to play in survival mode too. And Georgia did that. Season was on the line last weekend. They were in survival mode, and they turned it up a notch. Even when they got down 10-0, things weren't looking good. That Garza Beck scramble happened. The touchdown happened soon after. They started rolling, and then before you know it, they looked like easily one of the best teams in the country. From that second quarter on, they played great, but they haven't played like that for most of the season. They played like it some against Auburn and State, and that whole second half against Clemson, and against Texas, the defense gave one of the best performances we've seen a defense give in the Kirby Smart era. So we've seen this team play great. We've seen them play inconsistent. Obviously the wide receivers, if I can get my words out this morning, they've got to get better. They consistently drop passes. The defense has given up big yards and plays through the air, but they've started to really clamp down. They didn't give up any explosives against Tennessee. They gave up the 1 against Florida, none against Texas. So that defense is playing better and better. The secondary has played better, I think, as the season has moved along, especially since that Mississippi State game. And I know Ole Miss threw on them a little bit, but against Tennessee, I thought that the secondary played better and better as the game went on, and I thought they tackled better too. But Nick Saban is looking at this Georgia team saying, hey, watch out. They've got the heart of a champion. They could do this thing again, and you don't want to play a hot Georgia team in the playoffs, even if you're hosting them. If this Georgia team, I'll say it again, if they beat Georgia Tech comfortably, which could happen, and they don't play in the SEC title game, and they get healthier, and they've got several weeks to kind of prepare, I guess they won't have several weeks. They might have 2 weeks to prepare for, figure out who they're going to play and prepare them. But you don't want to play the Dogs in the playoffs if this team gets healthier and can be a little more consistent. That's tough to ask. I get that. But if the Dogs do it, they know what it takes to win a championship. They've done it 2 out of the last 3 years. They can do it again. They've got to get it done. If they play the way they did in the second, third, and fourth quarter, the rest of the season, they're going to be really, really tough to beat no matter where they play. But it definitely helps playing in Athens. Nick Saban thinks they can go all the way. At least that's what I took from that quote. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over on the website.